Hey, how's it going? It is Political Integrity here, and today I wanted to break down a video that Brian Tyler Cohen is talking about with Mark Cuban, who is essentially talking about Trump and his policies. So we're going to let the video play, and I'll stop it as needed to tell you a few things.
Mark, you argue that, and it's always good to have you, you argue that Donald Trump's are particularly, I think you used the word insane. What did you mean by that?
Yep. Well, first of all, strategic tariffs aren't bad. So if a company's trying to dump, or a country's trying to dump in the United States and we have a manufacturer there, tariff them, that's great. But across the board tariffs, 10 or 20% is just inflationary. It's a tax on the American consumer. But to make matters even worse, and what's truly insane, when you threaten a legendary company like John Deere with a 200% tariff if they move, but only a 10 or 20% tariff on China, what you're doing is you're making it easy for the Chinese competitors to take business away from John Deere. That is the definition of insane.
Okay, so let's break this down. He's talking about across the board tariffs are bad, but tariffing a company that's just dumping products in the USA is good. But then a 200% tariff on John Deere is bad. Well, let me explain to you why he's saying this and why you shouldn't believe his bullcrap. Number one, Mark Cuban is a billionaire. Every billionaire out there in the US, we only have one. Actually, no, I think two. Mr. Wonderful advocates with Fox, I think, a lot for President Trump. And if I'm not mistaken, he is a billionaire. And you got Elon Musk. I don't know many other billionaires out there advocating for Republicans. But you have the Democrats advocating, the billionaires advocating for Democrats. And the Democrats are generally friends with the billionaires. I mean, they were friends with Trump, and Trump was donating to Democrats because when he was doing so, they were working on his best interest. It wasn't what was the best interest of the average everyday American citizen. Now, why I say this is because Mark Cuban, as Brian will tell you in a minute, is one of the sharks on Shark Tank. And one of the very first things they say of a company that walks in and says, we're making this product for $26 right here in the USA with American workers. Well, why aren't you making it in China for 10 so you can increase your profit margin? Like, or whatever the case may be for the cost of making it in China when it can be a heck of a lot cheaper. Well, guess what? Mark Cuban invests in those companies that either have the product already being made in China, or they try to get the product made in China. There are some that are still made in the USA, and some will be. They're not going to switch to not making in the USA because they're like food items where he invested in stuff like the chocolate covered pretzels with candies and stuff. But products where it's like molding and electronics and stuff that come in there, yeah, a lot of them are made over in China. He invests in them. So what's that blanket larger tariff on China gonna do to him? It's going to increase the cost of getting the product to the USA to sell it. And then they got to determine if they're going to eat some of that in their profit, which they can very well do, because some of these have pretty good profit margins. When you hear it on Shark Tank, you can literally listen and hear what the profit margins are, and some are pretty good, some aren't. But they generally try to invest in some of the ones that are pretty good profit margins and scale them even higher. That's going to affect them, and they got to decide, is the consumer willing to pay a 10 to 20% higher price on the product because we're now getting a tariff that's even more? Sometimes they know the consumer's not willing to pay it, so that takes away their profit. That takes away Mark Cuban's money. And as far as that 200% on John Deere, for them making stuff out of the US, we have a John Deere factory where I live. I knew someone that worked for John Deere and they left working for John Deere And John Deere isn't scaling up the pay for some of the employees, not all, some positions, compared to the inflation right now, which is really difficult for a lot of places. So yeah, they're going to want to move a company to Mexico where it's going to be cheaper. But as Trump has tried to do in the past, he's tried to work with companies and create plans and policies that keep the jobs. If they want to build a new factory that has more jobs being in the US, and he helps them to do so. And he tries to do that across the board. Do you hear Kamala Harris saying that? Because guess what? Are we trying to keep jobs? Because moving those places to Mexico means you have less jobs. And then the products coming in, it's no longer a USA made product. And Mark Cuban here wants to say, oh, well, that encourages like China to come in because you have a much higher tax and China's going to come in selling a product. Well, guess what, Mark Cuban? John Deere has a brand and a name, and unless the manufacturing, which could be when it goes to Mexico, reduces the quality and tarnishes that name, they're still going to have buyers because it's John Deere. They have a brand. A China company more than likely doesn't have that well of a brand that they're going to steal the competition. Like their competition going to steal the consumers from John Deere. All right, back into it.
A lot of your business colleagues say the definition of insane is supporting Kamala Harris. Yet you do. You're a smart, savvy businessman. You came from nothing to be a multi-billionaire. So you're pretty good at what you do. What do you see in her that you don't see in Donald Trump?
I think she's thorough. If you look at Donald, right, when he talks about his policies, they're very impetuous, they're impulsive, they're set to match whatever's happening at a rally. Whereas with the Harris campaign and Kamala herself, she's very, very thorough. She's very precise. Her team really vets every idea. And to me, that's important as a business person because you can trust what she says. Think about what happens when Donald comes out and says, I'm going to put a 10% cap on credit card interest rates. The next thing that happens isn't that he explains why, it's that everybody around him explains what he says. He can't explain it for himself. Everybody's got to explain for him. Or whether it's a 10 or 20 or 60% tariff, or the 200% on John Deere. With Kamala Harris, no one has to explain for her. She takes the time to vet her policies thoroughly. And when she says them and presents them, they are what they are. They're self-explanatory.
They're not self-explanatory. She uses what they call word salad in explanations that are not really explanations. And Trump does explain about the 10% cap on credit card debt, but why does credit card interest at 10% cap temporarily, might I add, need an explanation? It's lowering the interest rate of credit cards to a cap of 10% to help against gouging the customers with high interest rates. Who doesn't know that? Like, I know they don't really teach this as much, if at all, in high school, but it should be taught on taxes and credit and interest because it's a part of our everyday life. You don't need to be teaching that. Like, as far as explaining it, I should say, it needs to be taught in school, but it doesn't need to be explained as Mark Cuban thinks. That's easy to understand, but Trump does explain it. Kamala Harris does not explain it. And her policies weren't even listed for the longest time. And then when asked about it, she kept referring back to being from a middle-class family and going on this speech. And when you ask her about policies like inflation and different things and how Americans are hurting, she talks about giving up to $50,000 now for small businesses instead of $5,000. So let me ask you this. Not every struggling family is out there running or trying to run a small business. So how is a $50,000 small business loan going to help them with everything going on in inflation? And she mentions price capping. And yes, price gouging. She mentioned about capping some prices and said that a lot of these big companies are doing it. Okay. But there's inflation across the board. It's not big companies being the only ones to do it. So what then? Because you're touting out that it's just big companies because inflation's not that bad now. They just haven't brought prices down because they want to see record profits. Well, it's because you're not really doing much to help inflation, and the inflation high prices that we still have are across the board, not just a big company, but a small company too. And your smaller companies are going away, and even some of your larger companies are going away. A lot of retail stores are feeling the hurt and going away. And then you got big box retail stores that are going away, but for a different reason of crime in major cities because they haven't reduced crime. So you have theft and you have other gun violence and violence going on that these big box retail stores say they can't afford to stay in some of these major cities with high crime. So they leave the high crime areas. And then the customers are asking the city, well, where am I going to buy groceries now? Because the grocery store down the street had left because the crime was too bad and y'all ain't doing nothing about it. So let's go on.
That was Mark Cuban continuing his tour advocating for Kamala Harris. And here's why what he's doing right now is especially damaging to Trump. Trump has spent years coasting on his businessman branding. And because most of us aren't the CEO of a multinational business conglomerate, we assume that those guys must be pretty good at what they do. And so Trump gets the benefit of the doubt because his name is on buildings and he's the guy who signs the checks and he's got a big bank account. But the danger of someone like Mark Cuban is that not only is he also a businessman, but he is the preeminent businessman in America. The guy has spent 24 seasons on Shark Tank, a show about business and entrepreneurs, as the effective king of the show, the top dog. So when this guy, who knows business, informs the rest of us that Trump is full of shit, then the veil has been lifted. And suddenly Donald Trump's competitive advantage in this race disappears, because without his business bona fides, he really doesn't have anything left. He's not good at policy, at governing, his speeches.
He's not good at policy, he's not good at governing. Well, considering he was president and we did not have any major issues that we are currently with today. So we didn't have a threat of a nuclear war, which, if you did not know, Ukraine has signaled the nuclear siren, and Russia is apparently preparing for war and training in their northern parts of the country. I'm guessing they want to try to bring the war, if there's going to be a war, from us and NATO into the northern territories of their country, where they might be more adapt to those climates compared to other countries. China, who, if you did not know, has partnered with Russia, and they are going out and getting new countries to trade with just in case a war does happen against the US and we're no longer their trade partners. They're trying to supplement everything that was coming from the US and they were trading to the US with other countries so that they can still do their thing while the US says, no, we're at war with China, we're not trading with you. Like, they're setting up the dominoes and getting ready to push it over while the Biden and Harris administration is in charge. Harris has just as much responsibility on this because she can push back. She can come out to these rallies and say, I am working with Joe Biden, and go against Joe. Joe Biden's not the nominee now. They pushed him out. She can say that Joe Biden has bad policies on this. Joe Biden hasn't done this. Joe Biden is the reason why Russia is getting to be a little bit bigger of a threat. There was articles even written that Ukraine may not even win this war. And we're just funneling money into Ukraine. So keep all of this in mind. And as far as Trump, bad businessman, remember, Mark Cuban is talking all of this stuff to help himself. It's in his best interest with his companies that he invests in and has. And he's not like one of the prominent figures on Shark Tank. As far as Shark Tank's concerned, there's 2 billionaires that have been on that show as the more regular sharks. You've had others come on like Richard Branson and stuff. But as far as one of the more regular people on the show, you had Kevin O'Leary on there, and he goes on to Fox and he talks about a lot of the good things Trump has said and has done. And he even speaks on some of the cases that were against Trump. And that even scared New York when he stated that a lot of people may not do business in New York thanks to that New York case against Trump for fraud. Because in his mind, a lot of business people were doing the same thing, and it's on the banks to do the due diligence, which they supposedly did, and they were okay with it. And the banks even testified they're willing to work with Trump again. But it's not good enough to the US. And remember, real estate experts also stated there's no way in heck that a lot of those Trump properties are worth what they say, when they showed evidence like Mar-a-Lago that there was other properties around that aren't even as big, aren't as nice, don't have the waterfront, yet those properties have been listed and or sold for a lot more and are valued at a lot more. Like, are they just putting the lower value on the property because it's Trump and they want to go after him for fraud? Because remember, Trump said they had his financial statements, and the fine they put on him in that case was what he had set aside for his campaign. All right.
These are confused diatribes that are incomprehensible to normal human beings. His temperament is terrible, and he's got autocratic tendencies. What Mark Cuban is doing is exposing the reality that, in fact, the guy has zero redeeming qualities that you would want in a chief executive. This was all born out of Trump's absurdly misguided decision to say this.
Behind me, John Deere tractors. I know a lot about John Deere. I love the company. But as you know, they've announced a few days ago that they're going to move a lot of their manufacturing business to Mexico. I'm just notifying John Deere right now. If you do that, we're putting a 200% tariff on everything that you want to sell into the United States, so that if I win, John Deere is going to be paying a 200%. They haven't started it yet. Maybe they haven't even made the final decision yet, but I think they have. John Deere is going to, and anybody else that does this, because it's hurting our farmers, it's hurting our manufacturing. And if you do that, you're going to have a 200% tariff put on the product that you make in Mexico, right across the border. They think they're going to make product cheaper in Mexico and then sell it in for the same prices they did before, make a lot of money by getting rid of our labor and our jobs, and really a great name, because John Deere is a great name. I buy a lot of John Deere, tremendous. I'm one of their big customers. I buy a lot of John Deere product as a private person. But if they're going to do that, we're going to put a 200% tariff on everything that they want to send back into the United States, which means one of two things. Our country's going to make a lot of money, or they're not going to build, they're not going to open. And, or they're going to sell it to another country. They're entitled to do that.
That he would impose a 200% tariff on John Deere. In fact, most of Trump's economic policy revolves around imposing tariffs. Trump has said that if elected again, he would add tariffs of up to 20% on every foreign import coming into the U.S., as well as another tariff upward of 60% on all Chinese imports. He also said he would impose a 100% tariff on countries that shift away from using the U.S. dollar, and he's floated a 100% to 200% tariff on cars made in Mexico. But what Trump doesn't seem to understand is that tariffs don't mean that the U.S. would suddenly collect extra money that magically goes into the general fund, nor does it get absorbed by the business. Tariffs are a tax passed on to the consumer, meaning the people who would pay more are Americans. Period. That is how tariffs work. There's no other way around this. It is a tax on Americans.
Tariff is not a tax on Americans. They are trying to scare you and tell you that a tariff is not that a tariff is tax on Americans. Well, newsflash, a tariff is not a tax on Americans. A tariff is a tax on the company's products that are coming in and sold to the American people, instead of having those products made in the US. Then the company themselves has a decision to make. Do they up the cost of the product and make less profit, or do they make up the cost to make the same profit, or do they make less profit and not up the cost? So they up the cost and you will have pay more, they make the same amount of money. Then that would be tax on the people paying it. But with the tariff, it's not meant for that. The companies decide that. But guess what? If a product is American made, potentially cheaper, and Trump's tariffs are making the other brand that is no longer USA made higher, where it could be comparable to the US brand, but now you have a US brand and the costs are now getting close to the same because there's a new tariff on the Chinese brand. A lot of people might go with USA brand. Some people still look at made in the USA as a good thing and go with that brand when the cost is the same. And that's what tariffs are supposed to do. They're supposed to even the playing field from the fact that a product is made elsewhere. It's not a tax on the people. It's a tax on the product. So he's just trying to scare you because it's in his best interest. Because guess what? Brian's delusional, brainwashed viewers believe every darn thing he says. And it's ridiculous. The guy makes millions of dollars just from YouTube alone. Then he had a book where who knows how much he made on that. And he has other social media platforms where he makes money. He's making millions of dollars from this. And as comedians said, you know what's hot right now? Bashing on Trump. I could easily make videos bashing on Trump. But then I'd be doing what they do and not telling the truth. Because what he's telling you is not the truth. It's some misinformation about the truth. Because yes, a tariff could be a higher price on the good, but it does not always have to be. That's on the company to decide. But it's supposed to even the playing field so that a product that is brought in from another country is not making it so American made products aren't being bought up as much, because you can buy something very similar from another product that was made cheaper. But guess what? All the everyday products that you need to survive, where are those made? Like your groceries. Most of the groceries you're getting are right here in the USA. Like a lot of the groceries you need to survive, like the farmers and stuff, that's from the USA. They're not upping those prices with tariffs. It's some of the other products, especially the luxury products. So your robots, your digital cameras, things that they might make from parts that are sourced out being made in other countries. Those products will have tariffs, which the people that are buying them can afford if the company decides to put a higher price on them. They can afford that. This guy has no freaking clue and is just out for his own interest, same as Mark Cuban.
Think about how many products you buy on a daily basis that come from other countries. Think about clothes and supplies and kitchenware, electronics, toys. Now imagine what the price of those items would look like with a Trump tax of 20%, 60%, 100%, 200% on top of that. This guy's inability to understand the economy is going to send your daily costs skyrocketing. And the irony, of course,
Your daily cost, what are you daily buying toys, electronics, and everything else under the sun? I mean, he's not sending your daily costs skyrocketing. Your daily cost is gas, groceries, your daily usage of electric bill and water, your office supplies that you might use daily, paper and things like that. A lot of those products are made in the USA. I don't know a daily use needed product that might not be made in the USA unless it's maybe hygiene. Like, are they making hygiene products somewhere? Because those are daily usage. Are they making those out of country? Because the other products we need to survive are in country. So, got no freaking clue, Brian.
is that Republicans have spent the last year crucifying Joe Biden over worldwide inflation, which is now not only down, but came down without a recession. The disastrous economy that the Democrats inherited from Donald Trump was handled perfectly by this administration. But still, Republicans clutch their pearls day in and day out over high costs, high costs, high costs. And yet now, their party is going to voluntarily send costs to the moon, all because their leader has the business acumen of a freshman econ major who's about to fail out of school. In fact, I discussed this exact issue with Mark Cuban during our most recent interview.
Tariffs can encompass multiple things, right? So, and he brought it up in the debate, look, the Biden administration did not remove the Chinese tariffs that he already had in place. And so it's not a bad thing to impose tariffs first when there's a strategic need. So if there's another country like China who is dumping particular products, whether it's washing machines, cars, and they're subsidizing the equivalent of dumping, right? So if that nation state is providing money to the manufacturing or the only manufacturing, so they're competing unfairly, that's okay to impose tariffs on. What doesn't work are revenge tariffs and across-the-board tariffs. Those are a disaster because they affect every product. So if he would have said, and even Kamala, if she would have said, look, tariffs aren't necessarily bad if they're strategic, and that's why we didn't remove the ones that are in place. But the idea of taxing everything and anything specifically because I don't like the people we're from or the country where it's originating is insane, because that truly is the sales tax that Kamala is talking about. And not only is it a tax to be paid on that product that's being imported, but there's also an additional tax on the company, because you have to deal with all the administration of filing the forms for the tariffs, or hiring a broker, dealing with the record keeping. So all these things, particularly if you're a smaller company, right, becomes not just a tariff on the tax on the buyer of the products, or a tax on the buyer of the products, but also a tax on the smaller company that's implementing it, or even a big company for that matter.
So look,
And guess what? He has big companies and he invests in small companies. So what he's talking about is going to greatly affect Mark Cuban. What Mark Cuban is saying is going to greatly affect him, and that's why he doesn't want tariffs across the board and wants strategic tariffs that may not affect him. He wants tariffs on select types of products and things that he probably won't be investing in. And also, mind you, Biden kept most of Trump's tariffs and he increased the tariffs on China goods. So it wasn't like it was like blank tariffs on China goods, which Mark Cuban doesn't seem to like, and seems to like Kamala Harris's policy. And she's getting flooded with money and donations. Why? Because all these rich people seem to like her policies, and it's because she is going to help them. Like Hillary admitted when she told Trump that he wasn't paying his fair share in taxes, and he's like, well, it's because of the tax codes that you helped implement. The tax codes give them loopholes. Same thing as the loopholes they had in that disastrous border bill that they touted out was a bipartisan border bill, which on the face said, hey, we're here for security, when there was so many loopholes like Swiss cheese that allowed the illegal immigrants, drugs, and everything else to still happen, and also donated money to Ukraine aid. Like, seriously? And you people ate it up as, hey, Trump stopped the border bill that was great for the country and it was bipartisan. And look, oh, this Republican shaking his head because they had a deal done. Well, yeah, it was not great. There was loopholes galore. It was just a way for them to say, hey, we're doing something about the border when they're not doing something about the border. Trust me, look it up.
I understand the allure of having a businessman in office. Trust me, I get it. I have a business degree myself. I understand how it's attractive to hear someone say that they'll run the country like they run their business. The problem is the way that Donald Trump runs his own businesses, most of which end in failure. Trump Airlines, Trump Water, Trump Steaks, Trump Wine, Trump Vodka, Trump The Game, Trump University, GoTrump.com. There is a reason you don't remember any of these existing for more than 5 minutes. It's because they were all ripoffs that all went belly up. He is not a businessman. The guy has a shitty licensing deal on 2 feet. He literally owes $500 million, billion with a B, because the Trump org was neck deep in fraud. The notion that Donald Trump will run the country like he runs his business isn't a selling point, it's a warning. And we should heed it while we still have the chance. Before you go, just a quick note, if you'd like to see more of my...
So there you have it, people. Like, the mere fact that he's touting out all of this, it helps him because he's making millions of dollars just hating on Trump, and it all helps Mark Cuban. You shouldn't listen and believe what they say. Take everything with a grain of salt. It is straight ridiculous, and I'm just gonna end the video here because it's very lengthy, and I just want to hear what you guys have to say in the comments. Let's keep this clean, civil. Debate me, prove me wrong, but I know you can't. Till next time, see y'all later.